This morning we turn to our fifth letter to the churches in Revelation. This letter is to Sardis, and it comes from Revelation chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. We're back on, there we go. To the angel of the church in Sardis write, "These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up! Strengthen what remains, for it's about to die. For I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard. Hold it fast and repent. But if you don't wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. Yet you have a few people in Sardis who've not soiled their clothes. They'll walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but I will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. For whoever has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. About 25 years ago, I entered college as a math major. Is that surprising? Who'd have thunk a pastor would have been a math major? My wife and I both started as math majors at Lebanon Valley College. We met first day of classes, freshman year, and we both converted from that heathenism. It was terrible. But just the other night, my oldest son, Eli, he's 16, he came to me and he said, "Dad, I want to make an octagon, an 8-sided shape. And I want it to be 8 inches by 8 inches, and I want all the sides to be the same length." Immediately, my mind went into math mode, right? And I thought, oh, this is easy algebra. And I sat down and I worked out the theorems and the equations and I did the math. And I was like, I don't have the right answer. I don't know how to finish this. It was basic algebra that I haven't done in 25 years. I forgot things like the quadratic formula. Do you know what the quadratic formula is? I don't remember what it is either. I did stupid little math things that as I'm looking at my work that I wrote down on the paper, I'm using capital letters. I would never have used a capital letter as a variable as a math major. Now that sounds really dorky and nerdy. I know, but that is a grave sin among math people. My numbers, I write, the first number in normal size, and then my decimals I write above. And Eli asked me, "Dad, what is 2 to the 726th power?" I was like, "What are you Oh, I'm so used to writing change these days, like on a check." And he saw it as the power of a number. There's another math sin I never would have committed. And yet these are the things that have creeped in over 25 years. The things that I've forgotten, the things that I used to be so on it and I can do in my head, now have become graven math sins. And fortunately, it wasn't a big deal. We were just cutting an octagon and trying to work on numbers. I wasn't building buildings or shooting for the moon. Thank God we wouldn't have made it. We'd have crashed and burned. But isn't that the way it goes? If you don't use it, you lose it. You know that? There's this atrophy that sets in on the muscles that we don't use. My mother retired from our insurance agency in August of 21, and we invited her back in November when we went on vacation, November of 21, only 3 months later. And in that short 3 months, so much had changed and she had forgotten so much that she said, "You know what, Jason? I don't ever want to do this again." It's funny how quickly and how subtly it goes when we don't use it. I remember as a young scout at scout camp, All the dads would come up for summer camp and there'd be a swim test. And these dads who haven't been swimming in 20 years, they'd hop in the pool. Oh, I got this. You know who the lifeguards had to fish out more than the kids? The dads. Our physical fitness does that to us, doesn't it? On days like today, the muscles need a little more stretching. It takes a little more work. Things seem to have stopped. You know, there was a time when each and every one of us was on top of the latest trends in the world, weren't we? Do you remember when this was new technology? Right? You can't even get these in antique stores anymore. VHS, how terrible. Even DVDs have gone the way of the dodo. If it's not streaming content online, it's not the latest. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I'm going skiing this afternoon. A couple of weeks ago, I took my son skiing, and it was the first time I'd been on skis in probably 20 years. You know, they got shorter. That's the thing now. I remember skis used to be really long. They used to be taller than me. No, they stand like this tall. That's it. Short skis is the thing to have. Who knew? I remember as a kid using my grandfather's circular saw from the 70s. Even then, that was archaic. But now I look at my own tools from the early 2000s, and they are so dated. Isn't it funny how quickly things become dated, fall out of vogue, and fall into atrophy? You see, whether it is within our lives, or within our spiritual lives, or within our general world, there's this apathy that leads to atrophy that steals our ability. Do you know what I mean? If we don't use it, we lose it. And if we're not focused on using it all the time, if we become apathetic about something, then the muscles start to freeze up and atrophy, and we no longer have the ability to use those things and do those things which we once found, so easy. Apathy leads to atrophy and steals our ability. Brothers and sisters, that is the key message to the church at Sardis. And a very large part of me wonders, is that the message to our church here in Rockville, our United Methodist Church here in the United States, our Christian church here in today's world? Is that message the very same one? Let me take you to the church at Sardis. I said a moment ago that the church at Sardis, this is the fifth letter, the fifth church that we've studied. We're over here in the Mediterranean. Here we are in Turkey. We've already talked about Ephesus and Smyrna, right there on the coast. We went all the way north to Pergamum, which was out there on some trade. Actually, Pergamum was in the middle of nowhere. Thyatira was on some trade roads. And now we're down there in the middle, right above Philadelphia. We're at Sardis. And the really great part about Sardis is on a river, so it's leading out to Smyrna, to the port at Smyrna, and Sardis is on a major trade road, the Silk Road. So it's got trade coming from both directions. This city is rockin'. Sardis was blessed with so many different things. You know, first and foremost, Sardis was blessed with gold. Anybody wish you could find gold in your backyard? That's what happened to Sardis. They found gold in their river that ran through town. In fact, Greek legend said that Dionysius, the god of blessings, was coming through town, and she met King Midas. And King Midas had a reputation that everything he touched would turn to gold. And the story goes that King Midas touched the river in Sardis, and gold was found there. They would just harvest that gold. They were the first to mint coins, and trade and coins and gold became hugely popular. And as you can imagine, Sardis became wealthy beyond measure. They started to produce luxurious things. They started to dye clothes, wool, and silk. In fact, they claim that they are the first place that invented dyeing cloths in the main province of Lydia. Anybody remember Lydia from Acts, who had a profession in dyeing wools and cloths? Sardis. This is where it's at. This is where we're at in this main town. Now, Sardis as a town was not only wealthy, but they were also very, very secure. They sat themselves on a hill, and we found some of the ruins. Go back 2 slides. There we go. We found some of the ruins. They were on this hill, so they felt relatively safe. And they built this huge bathhouse and gymnasium all in one. Now, that doesn't look like much there, but if we look at the next slide to a recreation, we believe this is what it was. It was just this huge bathhouse. Now, imagine a bunch of scantily clad individuals enjoying warm water in a building together. You know where that leads, especially if you've got plenty of time and money on your hands, right? Go ahead, let your mind go there, because that is what Sardis was known for. It was not a particularly moral place. They were so blessed with wealth and fortune and time and laziness that everything about their reputation, even in the ancient world, oh, you're from Sardis? There was great question. And within Sardis, even to the letter at the church at Sardis, Jesus finds it difficult to find anything good about them. To the other churches, Jesus writes, I know your good deeds, and lists off a couple. To the church at Sardis, Jesus says, I know your reputation. Not your good deeds. I know the word on the street about you. I know you have a past for being this, but that sure ain't who you are today. Jesus gets right down to the point, and he says, the sevenfold Spirit of God, the perfect, ever-seen, ever-present Spirit of God knows you ever so intimately, and I know all the things about you, and I know your reputation, and Jesus says, you are dead. Wow, Jesus. Talk about mincing no words. He just lays it out and says, you are dead. You are physically dead. You are spiritually dead. You might as well not exist. I know you have a reputation for being alive and doing a lot of things, but the reality is when you look at your little city, your big city, and you look at who you are as Christ followers, you ain't being very much like Jesus. You're dead. You're dead to me. Right? They have fallen asleep. They have fallen into an apathy, a spiritual apathy that has atrophied all of their spiritual muscles, and it has stolen their ability to be faithful people. And in the history of Sardis, this was incredibly important and incredibly poignant. Because as I said a moment ago, Sardis sits up on a hill, right? We've got a picture of the fortress of Sardis. You can see the cliffs around it are so incredibly steep. And twice in Sardis's history, they were laid siege. And you can imagine that if you're on a hill like that, there is no army that's getting into that fortress, right? Like, who in their right mind is going to be able to do this? Well, as King Cyrus had started to siege Sardis in, I believe it was 576 BC, he was standing there around the fortress, and he made a promise to his troops. He said, whoever can figure out who can breach the walls, how to breach the walls and take the city, I will give you your own kingdom. And so his troops were all looking for ways to get in, and as they were watching the city, they noticed one man on the wall in Sardis had dropped his helmet over the wall. And shortly thereafter, they saw a man sneak out a side door down a hidden path down the embankment to retrieve his helmet and scurry back up that path back into the city. There's a lot on the line here, isn't there, Cyrus? So a small band of Persian troops followed that same path up the wall into the city and didn't find anyone on guard. In fact, the troops inside of Sardis were so confident of how impregnable their fortress was, of how strong they were, that they all went to bed. Nobody was even keeping guard. And this band of 20 troops snuck into the city, opened the front gate, and sacked the city without ne'er a fight. They had fallen asleep. Wake up. As if that's not bad enough, about 200 years later, almost the same exact thing happened again. And I get it. I get it. If you were a watchman in Sardis, here you are, generation after generation, and nothing happens. You're sitting there on the wall, you're looking out at nothingness. Nobody's coming up these cliffs. Nothing in your week, nothing in your month, nothing in your year. Nobody that you've talked to on shift has ever seen anything happen on these walls. Your father never saw anything happen on these walls while he watched him. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, no one had anything dramatic to report from the night shift of Sardis. So why wouldn't you fall asleep? Church, do you hear me? Nothing seems to challenge our lives. Nothing seems to encroach our spiritual fortress. In our generation or the generation before us or the one before that, our mental history has such a short timeline to it. We forget the intensely difficult times and only remember the good. It's true, trust me, Disney is counting on it. You waited in line at Disney for 3 hours to get on that ride, but all you remember is the 30 seconds of elation that your kids enjoyed. That's what they're counting on. Our memories remember the good. But the apathy sets in when we're comfortable. There's this comfortable complacency that leads to apathy and atrophy and steals our ability. I wonder, church. I wonder, culture. I wonder, country. What are we going to do about it? It's easy to step back and to blame others. To blame others who aren't like us. To blame others who we think are really the problem. Oh, it's them. It's not. Them has always been there. Them has always been different. There's always been a them, brothers and sisters. And it's easy to blame them, but the reality is the problem is almost always us. It's easy to think that the problem is out there, but in reality the problem is that we're the ones that fall asleep. So what are we going to do about that? Because the subtle sins weave their way into our lives without us even knowing. Consider this for a moment, won't you? Who wants to join me in murder? Hard pass, right? But who will go home this afternoon and read some scathing reviews on Facebook and kind of feel okay about that? Who has ever had a proposition of an affair? Oh, I can't sleep with you, I'm married. And yet, on the other hand, well, it's just pictures, and that's not hurting anyone. You see how subtle and devious it is? Who has ever thought, oh, I'm not going to take revenge, that's God's. Only God has revenge. Oh, but I sure hope somebody does to you what you did to me. Right? We think these things. That's how it creeps in. How a healthy sense of self-worth can subtly become pride. How enjoying the material luxuries around us can quickly become materialism. Prayerfully sharing a concern over others turns into gossip. Righteously discerning what God would have us do morphs into unrighteous judgment. Being a good steward of money can easily become greed. Having a desire to see people held accountable and responsible can become unforgiveness. Wishing that you would have the success of others can easily become envy. The gift of persuasion becomes manipulation. Loving direct honesty becomes an excuse for harshness. Being responsible with what you have been given leads to becoming selfish with what you have. The big sins seem so obvious and there. And yet it's the little, subtle, sleeping sins that come into our lives and sack our fortress. And this is Jesus' message to the church at Sardis. Wake up. So, brothers and sisters, that's my question and my challenge to us this morning. What are we doing to stand on the fences? To stand guard over the fortress of our souls? What are we doing to remember that God is present within our lives and within our community? Where are we celebrating God's presence and pushing it further into the fore? Helping people to see God moving in and out of their lives. You see, the danger is that apathy leads to atrophy, which steals our ability. So it seems to me that the solution is that we would be on guard, not apathetic. We would be engaged, not on autopilot. We'd make those muscles work and stretch. And it hurts at first. But the best way to make the pain go away is to do it again and again and again and again. To keep running like a well-oiled machine. And we'll find that our abilities come back. So where, brothers and sisters, is God calling you? Where is God calling you in your spiritual life? Where is God calling you in your community life to serve, to lead, to be generous, to be His? That's the question I leave you with today, for that is the letter to Sardis. Amen? Would you pray with me?